The boy didn't cry when they shoved him. He didn't yell when they grabbed his backpack and threw it in the mud. But when the deputy's boot struck the old dog beside him, something inside Noah Brooks shattered. Jax didn't growl. He didn't bite. He only stood slowly, silently, his eyes fixed on the man in uniform. There was something ancient in the way the dog moved, something broken but unyielding, like a statue left behind by war. The scar on his hind leg was barely visible, but the pain behind those amber eyes was fresh. Noah reached for him with trembling fingers. Jax didn't flinch. He hadn't done so in Syria. He wouldn't start now. No one in Silver Hollow knew yet that this silent pair, a scarred veteran on 4 legs and a quiet boy with no place in town, would soon rip open the seams of a corrupt department, expose a hidden trail of betrayal, and remind everyone what loyalty, sacrifice, and healing truly meant. If you're watching this from a small town like Silver Hollow, drop your city name in the comments. Leave a like if you believe some guardians wear fur and never forget their oaths. Let's begin the story. The first morning in Silver Hollow smelled of pine and old gravel, the kind that clung to the air just after a light drizzle. Autumn was fading, and the golden haze that had once draped the Colorado hills was giving way to frostbitten edges and breath that misted with every word. A battered blue pickup truck pulled up to a modest, single-story house on Hemlock Street, its windows still taped from a windstorm 3 counties ago. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, except, of course, for the people no one wanted to know. Noah Brooks stepped out first, his thin frame wrapped in a navy hoodie that had seen better days, the sleeves a bit too long for his arms. He was 12, but the grief clinging to his hazel eyes aged him. His light brown hair was tousled, uncombed, the way it always seemed to be, and a scattering of freckles dusted his pale cheeks. He didn't speak much, not since his father died. He carried a backpack patched at the seams, and walked with a quiet steadiness that often made adults uneasy. Beside him leapt down Jax, a large German shepherd whose black and tan coat had dulled with age. At 9 years old, Jax still moved with a kind of heavy purpose, though a faint limp followed his right rear leg. His muzzle was graying, but the set of his jaw and the intelligent glint in his amber eyes suggested he had known discipline, war, and loss in equal measure. A scar curved faintly beneath his flank, almost hidden unless one was looking closely. Jax paused at the curb, taking in the neighborhood with a practiced caution, then placed himself beside Noah with the solemn poise of a soldier returning to unfamiliar ground. Rachel Brooks emerged next. 35, tall and slender, she had the weary grace of someone who had spent years putting others ahead of herself. Her shoulder-length ash-blonde hair was tied back loosely, and her hazel eyes flicked across the small yard with measured detachment. The pale tone of her skin betrayed long hours indoors under fluorescent lights. A registered nurse, she had just accepted a position at Silver Hollow's only clinic after months of searching for a fresh start. Her voice was always calm, a skill sharpened from years tending to patients and one very fragile son. The death of her husband a year prior had not hardened her, but it had made her quieter, less trusting, more careful. The house itself smelled faintly of mildew and pine cleaner, but it was theirs. Rachel unlocked the front door while Noah stood back. Jax entered first without command, his head low, sweeping the floor like a unit checking corners. Noah didn't stop him. He trusted Jax's instincts more than most people's words. Later that afternoon, Rachel suggested Noah take Jax for a walk around the block while she unpacked. The sun had slipped behind a veil of thin clouds, leaving the streets cast in dull gold. The town was quiet, almost too quiet. Noah kept to the sidewalk, Jax padding slowly at his side. They were just passing the municipal building when the door to the sheriff's office banged open. Out stepped Deputy Kyle Rusk, a thick-set man in his early 40s with cropped dark hair and a jaw that never seemed to relax. His brown uniform looked freshly pressed, but the scowl he wore seemed permanent. His blue eyes, cold and narrow, locked onto the unfamiliar pair. "Well, what do we have here?" Rusk said, his voice laced with something that wasn't quite amusement. "New kid with his old mutt, huh?" Noah froze. Jack stopped beside him, ears tilted back, but silent. Rusk took a few steps forward and looked down at the dog with mock curiosity. "Dog looks half dead. What's he even good for? Fetching bones from the retirement home?" He chuckled at his own joke, then, too quickly, lifted his boot and tapped it against Jax's side. Not hard enough to injure, but sharp enough to be noticed. Jax didn't growl, didn't flinch. He merely stood still, head lifting slowly, eyes locking onto the man. For one long second, the air turned dense. Noah felt something shift beside him. Not in Jax's muscles, but in his breath. It was the stillness before action, the silent tension of a dog who had seen war and learned patience was more deadly than impulse. "Hey now," came a voice from behind. Dr. Ben Holloway, the town's retired veterinarian, stood by the post office's bench, newspaper forgotten in his lap. In his 70s, tall and thin, with white hair combed back and a neatly trimmed beard, Ben had a kind gaze, but sharp senses. He wore a brown flannel shirt tucked into worn khaki pants, and his wire-rimmed glasses glinted in the afternoon light. "You shouldn't go kicking around animals you don't know, Deputy," he said evenly, "especially ones with eyes like that." Rusk scoffed. "It's just a mutt." Ben stood slowly, folding his paper. "That's not a mutt. That's a trained dog. You can tell by the way he plants his feet, the way he shields the boy's side without being told. That one's seen more than you and me put together." Rusk muttered something inaudible and walked off, the door slamming behind him. Ben approached the boy and the dog. "You must be Rachel's son," he said. "I'm Dr. Holloway. I used to patch up just about every critter in this county. Mind if I take a look?" Noah didn't answer, but gave a slight nod. Ben knelt beside Jax, who allowed the inspection without moving. The vet's fingers brushed over the dog's hind leg, where the faint scar still throbbed under the fur. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You've had a hard road, haven't you, fella?" he murmured to Jax before standing. "You picked a good friend, young man." That evening, Noah sat with Jax on the back porch while the sun dipped behind the hills. The town lay quiet, cloaked in pink and lavender dusk. Rachel watched them from the kitchen window, a faint smile tugging at her lips. They were strangers in Silver Hollow, yes, but they had brought something with them that the town had long forgotten, something older than memory and quieter than truth. A bond forged not in blood, but in survival. And something in the way Jax watched the road, even now, told her he wasn't done protecting just yet. The nights in Silver Hollow came colder than expected. By mid-October, the wind carried with it the scent of firewood and early frost curling through the shutters like a memory not quite forgotten. Rachel kept the heater low. It was an old house, and the wiring groaned if too many appliances ran at once. She preferred layering up anyway, and Noah didn't complain. He never did. That night, long after Rachel had turned off the kitchen lights and retreated to her room with a worn paperback, Noah lay curled under 2 blankets. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of old beams settling into the foundation. Outside, a stray leaf skittered across the porch. Then came the sound again, a low whimper almost too soft to hear. Noah sat up. Jax was lying by the front door, his head pressed to the wood shoulders, tense. His hind leg trembled slightly, and a soft whine vibrated in his throat. It wasn't pain exactly. It was something deeper, something older. The way a soldier might mutter in sleep, not from a nightmare, but from remembering too clearly. Noah slipped out of bed and padded barefoot across the floor. He crouched beside the dog, placed one hand on Jax's thick shoulder. "I'm here," he whispered. Jax blinked slowly, turning his head to rest his chin on Noah's lap. The boy stroked the gray along his muzzle, and Jax's eyes drifted closed again, though his ears remained upright. In the morning, Rachel noticed the dark circles under Noah's eyes. She stood at the kitchen sink, her hands resting on a chipped mug, watching him pick at a slice of toast. "Did you sleep?" she asked gently. Noah shrugged. She studied him for a moment. "He woke up again, didn't he?" He didn't answer. Rachel Brooks had always been a careful mother, not overbearing, but tuned into the frequencies most people missed. She had grown up in a home where silence meant danger and attention came at a price. She had promised herself her son would never feel that kind of aloneness, but after Robert's death, there were limits to how much she could protect. Later that day, Noah decided to walk Jax to the edge of the wooded path that circled the town. He liked the quiet there, and Jax seemed calmer when they were away from paved roads and chain-link fences. As they neared the trailhead, the sound of footsteps quickened behind them. "Hey, loser." Noah turned, his breath catching. 3 boys stood at the mouth of the alley, one of them, Jake Milner, smirking with practiced cruelty. Jake was taller than most kids their age, with red hair and a scab across his chin. His father owned the auto repair shop and wasn't known for his warmth. Jake had inherited both the frown and the foul mouth. "I heard your dog's got rabies," Jake sneered. "That true, or is he just old and stupid?" Noah said nothing, stepping slightly in front of Jax. The dog stood calmly, but his body tensed beneath his thick coat. His eyes tracked the boys without blinking. "Bet he bites," Jake said, tossing a rock that bounced harmlessly near Jax's paws. The German Shepherd didn't react, didn't flinch. He simply stepped forward, positioning himself between Noah and the group. His head lowered slightly, ears stiff, but no growl escaped him. A 4th voice broke the tension. "That's enough, Jake." It was Miss Casey, the librarian's daughter. Around 16, with long brown braids and a backpack covered in handmade patches, she had the kind of no-nonsense tone that came from working part-time with the fire department's volunteer crew. She stared Jake down until he muttered something and backed away, the other boys following reluctantly. "You okay?" she asked Noah. He nodded barely. She gave Jax a long glance. He didn't even move. "That's some discipline." Noah offered the smallest of smiles. That afternoon, Dr. Ben Holloway sat in his home office, surrounded by rows of old file boxes stacked like paper soldiers. He moved slowly. Arthritis in his hands made flipping pages a chore, but he was determined. He had pulled up every archive he could find related to military K-9 retirements in the western states over the last 5 years. It wasn't until he reached the Arizona files that he found a match. Name, Sergeant Jax Breed, German Shepherd. Service 7 years. Special Operations Support Unit. Handler Gunnery Sergeant Mason Wallace. Status retired due to trauma following Handler's death in combat. Ben leaned back in his creaking chair. The coffee on his desk had long gone cold. Mason Wallace. The name echoed faintly in his memory. He'd seen it once before in a newspaper article about a military funeral held in Denver. Closed casket. Hero's welcome. No mention of the dog. Ben pulled out a manila folder and began jotting notes. He would need to speak with Rachel soon. That evening, Rachel picked Noah up from the library and noticed how Jax positioned himself against the car door, blocking the handle with quiet insistence. She didn't say anything until they got home. "I know I said we'd give this a try," she said, her voice soft. I need to know. Do you feel safe with him? Noah didn't hesitate. Safer than I do with most people. Rachel watched her son closely, then turned to Jax, who stood silently at the doorway, eyes trained on the yard. Okay, she whispered. Then we'll trust him for now. And as the sun dipped behind the tree line, casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalk, Jax resumed his usual position by the front door, back straight ears alert. A sentinel, not of flesh and blood, but of memory and oath. The wind that morning bit sharper than usual, carrying with it the metallic scent of approaching rain and the soft rustle of dying leaves across the blacktop. Silver Hollow Elementary looked like any other rural school, red brick exterior, faded murals on the side walls, and a sagging chain-link fence out back that creaked whenever the wind caught it just right. Noah walked its hallways in silence, his backpack worn and slouched to one side, eyes avoiding the louder groups that filled the corridors with shouts and locker slams. At 12, Noah Brooks was neither remarkable nor completely invisible. He existed in the soft space between that quiet kid and the one with the scary dog. At recess, things changed. The yard was damp from overnight rain, but the boys didn't care. Jake Milner was back flanked by his usual shadows. Mark Denson, lanky and dull-eyed, and Tommy Wade, shorter but meaner. Jake's red hair flared under the overcast sky, his crooked smirk already in place. "Hey, Brooks," he called across the blacktop. "Heard your mutt's not allowed here unless it's Halloween." Noah didn't respond. He kept walking Jax, trotting beside him with his usual solemn pace. But Jake wasn't finished. "Why don't you bring him around back?" he said, lowering his voice and jerking his chin toward the rear of the school. "Bet he's not so tough without your mommy watching." Noah hesitated. He didn't want trouble. But he also didn't want to be called a coward again. So wordless, he turned toward the alley between the gym and the cafeteria, where the rear gate creaked open to a small fenced-off yard used for old equipment. The moment he stepped inside, the mood shifted. Jake moved in too close. What's it like living with a mutt that belongs in the ground? That was when Tommy shoved him. Noah stumbled but didn't fall. Jax tensed, moving forward one step, but held. Then Jake raised his foot. The kick never landed. Jax surged forward with a low growl, placing his body in front of Noah, head low, teeth bared but silent. It wasn't an attack. It was a warning, a line drawn with muscle memory and years of obedience. Jake froze, his leg still raised in hesitation. Behind him, Mark muttered, "Dude, don't. That's a police dog. Look at how he's standing." What this old mutt, Jake snapped, trying to recover. At that moment, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Ms. Harper, the assistant principal, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, coat flapping behind her. In her mid-40s, tall, with streaks of gray running through her dark blonde hair, Ms. Harper had a reputation for fairness, but not softness. Her slate gray eyes missed nothing, and the heels of her boots struck pavement like punctuation. Back inside. Now. All of you. The boys scattered, muttering. Noah remained still. Jax sat beside him, body between him and the fence. "I saw enough," Miss Harper said, walking up. "You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did he. But this town's full of people who don't understand animals like that." Noah nodded. She sighed. "I'll have to report it anyway. School policy." Then softer. "Keep your head up, Noah." 2 days later, a letter arrived at Rachel's door, official stationery, stamped by the Silver Hollow Sheriff's Office. It stated that due to a reported incident involving a minor deputy, Kyle Rusk, was requesting a behavior reassessment of the dog registered under Noah Brooks, namely, Jax. Rachel stood in the kitchen holding the letter, her face, pale lips pressed thin. "He's doing this on purpose," she said. "Rusk's never liked us. This is just retaliation." Noah didn't respond. He stood near the window watching Jack sleep by the back door. The dog stirred at the sound of paper crinkling but didn't move. That night, as the rain began to tap against the glass in earnest, Noah knelt beside Jack's, running his fingers gently along the worn leather of the old tactical collar. Something rough caught under his thumb. A seam, maybe. He looked closer and saw the tiniest thread hand-stitched into the inside lining. Carefully, he dug a fingernail under the flap, peeling it back to reveal a pocket barely large enough for 2 fingers. Inside, wrapped in what felt like old waxed paper, was a small note folded tight and brittle with age. Noah sat on the floor, the light from the hallway casting long shadows as he unfolded it with care. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate, written in black ink that had faded to gray. It read, "If you're reading this, it means you found the part of me I couldn't say aloud. Jax isn't just a dog. He's a soldier. He's my brother. If I don't make it home, you take care of him the way he took care of me. He listens better than most people. And he never forgets a promise." Mason Wallace, USMC. Noah's throat tightened. He read it again, and again. Then he folded it carefully, slid it back into the collar, and laid his head against Jax's chest. The dog stirred, letting out a low, warm breath through his nose, and shifted his weight so one paw rested over Noah's foot. The storm outside thickened, but inside the Brooks house, something had solidified an invisible thread tugging at 2 souls stitched together by grief trust, and something older than either of them could name. The rain had passed, but its chill lingered in the bones of Silver Hollow like an old ghost reluctant to leave. Patches of mist clung to the low hills, and puddles in the cracked asphalt reflected a dull, washed-out sky. Inside the Brooks household, the morning air was quiet, too quiet for a Saturday. Rachel stood in the kitchen, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, her eyes drifting toward the back porch where Noah sat cross-legged, Jax lying beside him like a weathered statue. The letter had been folded neatly and placed on the windowsill just out of reach of the damp. Rachel hadn't asked about it, but she saw the change in Noah's face since the night before, softer around the edges, more present, as if the boy who had drifted in grief was beginning to feel the ground beneath his feet again. She stepped outside, her cardigan clutched around her like armor against the wind. "You want to talk about it?" she asked, her voice gentle. Noah nodded slowly. He passed her the letter without a word. Rachel unfolded it, reading the weathered lines, the ink blurred slightly by time and the press of fingers too young to carry so much meaning. Her hands trembled by the second sentence. "If you're reading this, it means you found the part of me I couldn't say aloud. Jax isn't just a dog. He's a soldier. He's my brother." The words were simple, honest, raw in a way that made her throat tighten. She looked up at her son, who watched her not with fear but with a quiet kind of hope. "I believe him," Noah said. Rachel exhaled. "So do I." That evening she drove Noah to the edge of town where Dr. Ben Holloway lived, a modest home set behind a row of thinning pines. The porch light was already on when they arrived, and the old man himself stood at the door, one hand resting on a cane, the other holding a tea mug with a chip along the rim. Ben was as sharp as ever, despite the years, tall and lean, with a face weathered like sandstone, pale blue eyes, and a voice that always sounded halfway to a story. He wore a wool vest over his flannel and greeted them with a quiet nod. "Evening," he said. "Come in. Fire's on." Inside, the warmth was immediate. Books lined every shelf, and framed photographs of animals, some proud, some pitiful, hung above the fireplace. Jax settled immediately near the hearth, eyes flicking from flame to shadow like a watchman. "I need to know the truth," Rachel said as they sat. Ben took a long sip from his mug before replying. "I figured you would." He rose slowly, moving toward a small cabinet near the hallway. From it, he retrieved a file folder thick with papers. He handed it to Rachel but looked at Noah. "You should be the one to read it out loud." Noah opened the folder. The top document was a medical vaccination log, Jax's real name printed across the top, Sergeant Jax K9 M411 Unit, USMC. Below that, dates, doses, signatures. Near the bottom, one stood out, administered by Dr. Benjamin Holloway, Fort Carson, CO, March 22, 2019. "That was the last time I saw him with his handler," Ben said. Mason Wallace. Quiet young man, but sharp. There was a weariness in his eyes that didn't come from age. He brought Jax in for booster shots before they deployed again. "I remember. He kept one hand on the dog the entire time, like he was grounding himself." Ben leaned forward. "After Mason died, the military didn't know what to do with Jax. He wasn't aggressive, but he refused food, wouldn't respond to new commands. Most dogs like that are reprocessed for reassignment, but someone, probably Mason's CO, flagged him as unfit for duty, recommend honorable discharge. That's rare, especially for a K9 with his record." Noah sat still, absorbing each word like a sponge. Jax didn't move, but his ears twitched slightly, as if he too remembered. Ben placed another photo on the table. It showed a younger Jax standing next to a tall man in uniform with close-cropped brown hair and a kind smile, Mason Wallace. The man's hand rested gently on Jax's shoulder, his other holding a folded flag. "That photo was taken at a base memorial," Ben said, "after a mission went wrong in northern Syria. They lost 3 men. Mason was one. Jax wouldn't leave his side, not even when the medics came. Took 2 officers to pull him away. He was shot in the leg, protecting Mason's body." Rachel's fingers went to her mouth. "They called me 2 months later." Ben continued. "Asked if I knew anyone who'd take a retired K9. I didn't. But I told them if he ended up in Colorado, I'd see to it someone decent found him." Rachel looked at Noah. The boy's eyes were glassy, but he didn't cry. "That letter," Ben said softly, "was likely hidden by Mason the day before that last mission. He must have stitched it into the collar himself." They drove home in silence. The kind that wasn't empty but full of meaning too big for words. Jax sat upright in the back seat, nose out the cracked window, ears alert. When they got home, Rachel paused at the door. "If it comes to it," she said, "if they want to question him, we won't hide anything." Noah nodded. "He's not something to be ashamed of." "No," she said. "He's something to be proud of." Inside, Jax returned to his usual spot by the door. Not sleeping, not yet, but present, always. Silver Hollow's annual Fall Lantern Festival brought a rare warmth to the town's chilly October evenings. Main Street shimmered with paper lanterns strung overhead, their flickering gold light casting long shadows over cracked sidewalks and shuttered storefronts. For a few hours, laughter and music softened the town's sharp edges. Children ran with glowing balloons, and families lined up for cinnamon cider and roasted corn. Noah and Rachel had joined the crowd, staying until the last musical act closed the stage and the crowd began to thin. Jax walked beside Noah the entire evening, his posture relaxed but his eyes always scanning. Rachel had volunteered to help clean up the clinic booth and asked Noah to walk home ahead of her. He didn't mind. The air was cool and the streets mostly empty. He took a quieter path through the side alleys near the train yard, faster, quieter. The train station in Silver Hollow hadn't been used in years. The freight depot, a long corrugated steel structure behind the old platform, was slowly being consumed by ivy and time. Even the homeless dogs avoided it. As Noah and Jax passed behind the depot, a sound broke the stillness. A metallic clatter. A voice sharp muttered something unintelligible. Noah froze. Jax's ears snapped forward, nose twitching. Another voice, lower, harsher. "Keep it quiet." We're almost done. Noah reached for Jax's collar, ready to turn around, but his foot struck a gravel patch and slipped. His hand reached out instinctively, gripping the edge of a stacked crate, and with it came a soft scrape that echoed just enough to catch attention. A flashlight beam snapped in their direction. "Who's there?" barked a voice that stopped Noah cold. Deputy Kyle Rusk stepped into the open, dressed not in uniform, but in a dark jacket and jeans. His bulk was unmistakable. His face, half lit, carried a twist of recognition and then fury. "You again?" Rusk growled, stalking forward. "You little rat, snooping where you don't belong." Noah stumbled backward. Jax moved between them. "You and your mutt think this is a game Rusk advanced. I ought to haul you in for trespassing, you hear me?" Jax bristled. The dog's stance lowered steady and coiled. Noah's voice trembled. "We weren't doing anything." Rusk raised a hand as if to strike or grab, but he never got the chance. Jax surged forward in a single fluid motion. He didn't bite. He stopped short, chest squared, teeth bared in a soundless snarl. The message was crystal clear: one more step and the line would be crossed. From above, a small red light blinked from the depot's overhang. The old security camera, forgotten by most, had turned to follow the motion. Rusk hesitated. He looked up, cursed under his breath, and stepped back, fists clenched. "You listen to me," he hissed, pointing a thick finger toward Noah. "If you say a word about this, you'll regret it. You and your mutt." Without waiting for a response, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Noah stood frozen. Jax didn't move until the sound of footsteps faded completely. Then the dog turned, nosed Noah's wrist gently. They walked the rest of the way home in silence. The next morning, Noah said nothing over breakfast, but Rachel noticed the tightness in his shoulders. When he finally told her everything, she listened without interrupting. Her face turned pale. "He threatened you?" she asked quietly. Noah nodded. Rachel stood and picked up her keys. "We're going to see Ben." Dr. Holloway answered the door in his usual flannel and slippers, surprised by their urgency. As Noah recounted the events, Ben's expression darkened. "There's still a working camera over that depot," he said. "I remember it was tied into the old downtown circuit. They never decommissioned it because it was too expensive. If it caught what I think it did..." He picked up his phone and called someone directly. "Chief Grayson," he said. "It's Ben. I need a favor." "Yes. The depot camera. Today." The police chief, William Grayson, was in his early 60s with a broad-frame graying buzz cut and the no-nonsense demeanor of a man who had outlasted 4 mayors. He met them at the station by early afternoon, his jaw set like concrete. "I don't take accusations lightly," he said to Rachel after hearing the story. "But if Rusk is involved in something illegal, I want to see it stopped." The footage from the depot was grainy but clear enough. It showed Rusk stepping out from the shadows. His face, his voice barely caught on the audio. His aggressive stance, then Jax stepping forward with perfect control. "That's a trained dog," Grayson murmured. "No aggression, just calculated protection." He paused the video and looked at Ben. "You were right." Rachel sat straighter. "What now?" Grayson rubbed his temples. "Now we document it, build a case. I'll need your written statements. And Rachel?" "We'll need you to testify." She nodded. "Whatever it takes." Noah watched all of it silently. Jax sat at his feet, unmoving, his gaze locked on the flickering screen as if he too remembered the confrontation. The old soldier once again guarding what mattered most. The courtroom in Silver Hollow wasn't built for spectacle. It was modest, lined with pine benches and aging brass fixtures, tucked into the rear wing of the town hall, beneath a faded portrait of President Truman. Yet, on that cold Tuesday morning, every seat was filled. Reporters from the county paper whispered quietly in the back row, townsfolk clutched their coats and coffee, and a tension far older than the wood in the floorboards hung in the air. Deputy Kyle Rusk sat at the defendant's table, face set like stone. He wore his brown uniform jacket despite having been formally suspended. His arms remained folded across his broad chest, as though defiance alone could shield him from consequence. The sharp crease in his trousers contrasted with the cold sweat that clung to his brow. Beside him sat his attorney, a man from Ridgeway with thin lips and tired eyes, who looked as though he too had begun to regret his choices. Judge Evelyn Garrison presided, an older woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Her voice, though soft, could command a courtroom with the weight of a gavel. Today's hearing, she began, concerns the conduct of Deputy Kyle Rusk in relation to unauthorized activities on municipal property, abuse of authority, and accusations of intimidation involving a minor. Additionally, the court will assess the behavior of the animal involved, a registered German Shepherd named Jax, currently under temporary evaluation. Rachel Brooks took the stand first. She wore her navy scrub jacket and dark jeans, hair pulled back in a simple knot. Her voice didn't shake. "Deputy Rusk threatened my son," she said. "He accused him of trespassing when he was simply walking home." He raised a hand to him. Jack stepped in but did not attack, he warned. He protected. Dr. Benjamin Holloway followed. He was dressed as always, flannel over corduroy, his presence more grandfather than witness. He brought with him copies of Jax's military file photographs of Jax and Mason Wallace and a signed affidavit verifying Jax's prior service and honorable discharge. This dog, Ben said, clearly served in Syria. He protected his handler and later my patient Noah Brooks. What he displayed was not aggression, it was training. When Noah stepped to the stand, the room hushed further. Dressed in a clean hoodie and pressed jeans, his hair combed but still unruly, he sat with his back straight and hands gripping the armrest. "Jax is the only reason I wasn't hurt that night," he said simply. "He stood between me and a grown man. He didn't bite, he didn't growl first, he just waited." Rusk shifted in his seat, jaw clenching. The prosecution played the depot security footage next. The video was grainy but clear. Rusk advancing Jax, standing firm. The threat in Rusk's tone unmistakable even in muffled audio. Gasps echoed from the benches. Judge Garrison paused the tape and peered over her glasses. "Mr. Rusk," she said, "you're a deputy of this town. You took an oath to protect. What I see here is a breach of that oath." His attorney mumbled a protest about context, but Garrison silenced him with a glance. The final witness was unexpected, a man in a dark blue suit with the insignia of the National Military Canine Foundation pinned to his lapel. His name was Raymond Till, mid-50s, salt and pepper beard, upright posture. He introduced himself as the director of the Veterans Canine Recognition Initiative. "We've reviewed the circumstances of this case," he stated, "and we wish to formally request that Sergeant Jax be recognized in our upcoming national memorial as a canine who served with honor both abroad and at home." Murmurs swept the room. Judge Garrison smiled faintly, the first crack in her stoic expression. "That is noted, Mr. Till, and appreciated." By late afternoon, the ruling was clear. Judge Garrison's voice rang with calm authority. "Jax is hereby cleared of any suspicion of dangerous behavior. His actions were protective, proportional, and consistent with advanced training. He will not be subject to further evaluation." She turned to Rusk. "Deputy Rusk, you are hereby relieved of duty effective immediately. The court finds probable cause to pursue charges of abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and possible criminal conspiracy related to the depot incident. You will be remanded pending further investigation." Rusk stood suddenly. "You think this town will survive without men like me?" he spat. Garrison's gaze didn't falter. "I think this town will begin to heal because of men like you being held accountable." Outside the courthouse, Rachel wrapped an arm around Noah as reporters tried to approach. "Doctor." Holloway shielded them with his wide frame, muttering, "Let the boy breathe." Jack stood at Noah's side. His stance relaxed for the first time in weeks. That night, a letter arrived at the Brooks mailbox. It bore the seal of the K-9 Veterans Foundation and included a photo of a bronze plaque being prepared for Washington, D.C. It read, "In honor of Sergeant Jacks, for courage without command and loyalty without limit." Noah taped the photo to his wall. Jacks lay curled at his feet, finally asleep. The snow had not yet arrived in Silver Hollow, but the air had begun to whisper of winter. Trees stood bare against a brittle sky, and the town square had exchanged its lanterns for wreaths and pine garlands. A sense of renewal lingered in the streets, quiet but noticeable, like the scent of wood smoke or the first crackle of ice forming on the surface of the lake. And at the center of that slow change stood a boy, a dog, and the story that had turned a quiet town on its head. Noah Brooks stood stiffly on the steps of the town hall, his navy hoodie traded for a slightly too large blazer borrowed from the principal's office. His cheeks were pink from the cold, but his hazel eyes were calm. Beside him, Jack sat tall, his posture impeccable, the gray on his muzzle catching the morning light. Around his neck was a temporary cloth sash that read, "Guardian of Silver Hollow," in block letters stitched by the mayor's wife herself. The dog didn't fidget, didn't blink under the camera flashes or the clapping crowd. He simply watched, steady and proud. Mayor Howard Lawson, a stout man in his early 60s with thick glasses and a salt and pepper mustache, adjusted the microphone stand with more ceremony than necessary. Today, he said, "We honor a protector whose loyalty needed no command, whose courage came without question. Sergeant Jacks, known now to most of us as simply Jacks, is hereby named the official guardian of Silver Hollow." He turned toward Noah. "And to the boy who stood beside him, believed in him, and taught us what trust really means. Congratulations on your state essay win, Noah." Applause erupted. Noah flushed but didn't shrink away. His essay, titled "The Quiet Hero Who Sleeps at My Door," had won first place in the statewide Unsung Heroes competition. It had been printed in the Sunday edition of the Colorado Pioneer and shared hundreds of times online. Later that afternoon, Rachel stood near the clinic's front desk, now wearing a name tag that read, "Rachel Brooks, RN, full staff." Her hair was pulled into a neater bun than usual, and the circles under her eyes had faded. A patient waved to her from the waiting room, a sign of familiarity that still felt strange. But the offer to make her position permanent had come the day after Rusk's sentencing, and she had accepted without hesitation. Dr. Holloway now came by the Brooks house nearly every other day. He claimed it was to check the old boy's gait, but everyone knew it was more about the tea and the company. He and Rachel sat on the porch and spoke quietly while Jacks dozed at their feet and Noah did homework nearby. In that calm, Ben Holloway had found something he didn't realize he missed a place to belong after years of drifting between clinic hours and empty silence. It was on one such afternoon, a week after the ceremony, that a motorcycle's low growl disturbed the quiet. The engine sputtered and stopped just beyond the front gate. Noah looked up from his notebook. Rachel rose slowly, her brow furrowed. Jacks lifted his head, ears twitching. The man who dismounted the bike looked to be in his late 30s with a worn leather jacket, sun-leathered skin and hair tucked under a faded cap. He moved stiffly, favoring his left leg. In his hand was a small cloth pouch. As he approached, his eyes locked on Jacks, not with fear but recognition. "I didn't think he'd remember me," the man said. Rachel stepped forward cautiously. "Can we help you?" "My name's Michael Lang," he said. "I used to ride with a crew. A bad one. 3 years ago we ran into a checkpoint outside Yuma. Jacks was there. I raised a crowbar. He had every reason to take me down. But he didn't. He just stood between me and the guy I was about to hurt and stared like he knew I was already breaking apart." Jacks rose now slowly. He approached the man with no sound, stopping a few feet away. The two regarded each other for a moment, the stillness thick with unspoken memory. Michael smiled faintly and crouched to Jax's level. I got out. A year later. Been clean since. Working with kids now, teaching them how to ride, how to fix engines. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for this dog. He held out the cloth pouch. Inside was a leather collar hand-tooled with care. Embossed in silver stitching were the words, "Still standing, still serving." I made it myself, Michael said. Figured he deserved something better than an old army strap. Rachel reached out to take it, but Michael shook his head. Let the boy do it. Noah stepped forward. His hands trembled slightly as he removed the worn military collar and gently fastened the new one around Jax's neck. The fit was perfect. Jax licked his hand once, then settled beside him. Michael tipped his cap. Thank you, he said quietly, and walked back to his bike without another word. That night, Rachel stood by Noah's door watching him sleep. Jax lay at the foot of the bed, eyes half closed but awake as always. She whispered, "You're not just guarding the house, are you? You're guarding what's left of our hearts." Jax blinked slowly, understanding without needing words. The wind that swept through Silver Hollow that night was soft but icy, the kind of wind that whispered under doors and curled around eaves like a quiet ghost. The snow hadn't yet fallen, but frost glazed the windows in delicate lace. Inside the Brooks home, all was still. The heater hummed low, and the only light came from a dim porch lamp spilling through the living room window, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Noah stirred beneath his blankets, his breath fogging slightly in the chill. Something had woken him. Not a noise loud enough to startle, but a sound too deliberate to ignore. A soft rustle, barely more than a shift of weight. His eyes opened, and instinctively he turned toward the door. Jax was not at the foot of the bed. Noah sat up slowly. The house was dark, but not unfamiliar. He padded barefoot down the hall, passing Rachel's door slightly ajar, soft breathing within, then continued toward the living room. There beside the window that faced the street lamp, Jax lay stretched out on the wooden floor, his head resting on crossed paws, eyes wide open and reflecting a warm gold under the dim light. Noah didn't speak at first. He knelt quietly beside him, watching the stillness in Jax's body. The lack of tension that had for months made every night a silent war. No twitch of the ears, no restless shifting. Just calm. Outside, a rabbit darted across the snow-patched lawn, and Jax's eyes followed, but made no move to rise. The new collar around his neck, hand-tooled leather with silver stitching, caught the light just enough to shimmer. "You're not standing guard tonight," Noah whispered, placing a hand gently on the thick fur of Jax's neck. "You're just watching. That's different." Jax blinked slowly, the movement deliberate, soft. A breath eased from his nose, long and low. Noah leaned closer and said the words he hadn't realized had waited all this time to come out. "You don't have to protect us anymore, Jax," he murmured. "You already did. You brought us back. We're not broken now. We're family." Jax moved only to press his nose against Noah's arm. The two remained there side by side, the way soldiers sometimes stand beside comrades when the battle is done not in vigilance, but in silent tribute to what had been endured together. By morning, a thin layer of frost rimmed the porch railing, and Rachel stood wrapped in a thick gray shawl mug of tea in hand. Her eyes were still tired, but there was something new there. Peace, maybe, or perhaps just the long-awaited absence of dread. She watched her son and the dog through the window, both still asleep under the soft haze of dawn. Later that day, Rachel sat down at the kitchen table with her old laptop open and the cursor blinking in an empty post window. She hadn't written anything public in months, not since Robert's death, not since the weight of words had begun to feel too heavy to hold. But this time it came with ease. She typed not to explain, not to defend, but simply to offer something true. There are souls in this world who were once torn by war, by grief, by betrayal. We see the damage, the frayed edges, the fear in their quiet moments. But sometimes those are the very souls who hold us together, who stand when no one else will. I've seen what love looks like in the eyes of a wounded animal who chose day after day to stay, not because he had to, but because he made a promise once to someone long gone. We are here, we are whole again, because he kept it. She hit post and closed the laptop. On the front porch that afternoon, Dr. Holloway stopped by with a bag of dog biscuits and a bottle of old cough syrup. He claimed both were for Jax, though Rachel doubted that second one. "You know," he said, sitting down beside her on the steps, "when I first saw that dog, I thought he was near the end. Most of them come home with too many ghosts and not enough left in them to chase anything but memory. But he surprised me. He surprises all of us," Rachel said softly. Ben handed her a small plaque, unfinished wood edges, sanded but unvarnished. Carved into it with neat, steady letters were the words, "Here lives Jax, the warrior who chose peace." Rachel held it gently in her hands, the corners warm from Ben's coat pocket. "I figured he deserved more than just medals and stories," Ben said. She nodded. "He deserves a home." That night, as snow finally began to fall, light drifting flakes that clung to branches and softened rooftops, Noah watched from the window. Jax lay beside him, eyes closed, breath steady. The plaque rested just above the fireplace where the warmth reached but didn't warp its meaning. There were no more patrols to walk. No more threats to watch for. Only sleep, only stillness, only peace. Sometimes God sends warriors not with swords or armor but with fur scars and amber eyes. Jax was more than a dog. He was a protector, a silent guardian shaped by hardship, softened by love, and restored through the grace of belonging. In his journey from battlefields to a quiet porch window, we're reminded that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it lies down beside us, keeps watch while we sleep, and teaches us that peace is not the absence of pain, but the choice to love despite it. This story is a quiet miracle, a whisper from God that even the most wounded can still become vessels of light. So if you're holding on to broken pieces today, remember what's been scarred can still be sacred. And those who've endured the darkest nights often shine the brightest in our lives. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that they're not alone. Comment Amen if you believe that every soul deserves peace and a second chance. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more true stories of faith healing and the incredible bond between humans and the creatures we call family. May God bless you and keep you always.